Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, Governor Greg Abbott says the death toll from the devastating Texas floods has reached 109. And another 161 people are still missing. First responders continue their search and rescue efforts, and the Kerr County Sheriff says they're putting together a timeline of events. David Lamb brings us the latest. President Trump holds his 6th cabinet meeting defending the tariff letters he's sending out, what Homeland Security Secretary Noem is saying about the Texas floods, plus how Attorney General Bondi responds to questions about Jeffrey Epstein. Iris Tao at the White House. President Trump expected to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu again today to discuss Gaza after the two leaders had dinner at the White House last night. Meanwhile, a report is released on Hamas using sexual violence as a weapon of war. Jason Perry reports. The U.S. is set to send more weapons to Ukraine. Arian Pazdar has what President Trump says about the decision and about Russia choosing to continue the war. And the TSA is ending a 20-year-old rule requiring travelers to remove their shoes at security checkpoints. Jason Blair is standing by at Reagan National Airport in D.C., where DHS Secretary Noem made the announcement moments ago.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. A day after President Trump sent over a dozen tariff letters to countries around the world, he stands strong in his trade negotiation strategy. At a cabinet meeting, Trump discusses trade deals and the Texas flooding. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
President Trump this afternoon held his 6th cabinet meeting, and as usual, he opened it up to the press, talking to reporters, answering questions along with his cabinet officials. And of course, among the top topics today, a federal response to the devastating flood in Texas that has killed over 100 people. Homeland Security Secretary Noem reflected on her time visiting Texas flood survivors on the ground, expressing gratitude for God's hand in the rescue efforts.
This is a time for all of us in this country to remember that we were created to serve each other. God created us to take care of each other.
She was visibly emotional while recalling visiting families of Camp Mystic flood victims, including parents who were picking up their kids' belongings out of the mud.
One of the dads said, I knew 50 of these girls here. So I knew that was her dress and my daughter's friend's dress, so he was picking it up and putting it in a bag to return to her parents. And
President Trump praised what he calls a unified response, saying it saved lives, and also says that he's visiting the area on Friday with the First Lady. Meanwhile, Attorney General Bondi during the cabinet meeting was asked about the Epstein files. President Trump interrupted and accused the reporter of wasting time.
We have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things. And are people still talking about this guy, this creep?
Well, Bondi doubles down on the FBI and DOJ's conclusion this week that there was no incriminating client list.
I was asked a question about the client list, and my response was, it's sitting on my desk to be reviewed, meaning the file, along with the JFK, MLK files as well. That's what I meant by that.
In other news, after sending letters to countries like South Korea, Japan, and Thailand, the president is now informing more countries of new U.S. tariffs. He says it's basically my deals to these countries. He says in the next 24 hours, there will be a flurry of more such letters and what he calls deals going out to these countries. And he also says that it's time for these countries to stop ripping the U.S. off, and that's why he has to do this, to impose tariffs on them, as negotiating with, as he says, 200 countries will be too time-consuming as well as complicated. Watch.
It's about time the United States of America started collecting money from countries that were ripping us off and laughing behind our back at how stupid we were.
We've taken in about $100 billion in tariff income. We could expect that could be well over $300 billion by the end of the year.
And yesterday, the White House press secretary told NTD that the president is taking issue with the BRICS nations' policies that he calls anti-American. And today, President Trump says that he'll be very soon hitting BRICS nations, which includes, for example, China, Russia, hitting them with a 10% tariffs, as Trump says they're trying to destroy the dollar so that another country can take over and be the standard. And President Trump says that's not going to happen. Back to you.
Parts of Texas are still recovering from devastating floods. President Trump and the First Lady say they'll visit Texas on Friday. Authorities in the state are currently putting together a timeline of events to share with the public. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Texas was hit with deadly floods over the 4th of July weekend, with the number of reported deaths at 100 now and many more who are missing in Kerr County, the hardest hit area.
There are 161 people who are known to be missing. And again, that comes from combined law enforcement efforts, 161 known people who are missing.
As first responders try to rescue survivors and victims, Kerr County officials gave an update on Tuesday.
As of 8 a.m. Central Time, 87 deceased have been recovered in Kerr County, including 56 adults and 30 children.
Heavy rains on early Friday caused the Guadalupe River to rapidly rise. Emergency notifications were sent around 1 a.m. The flood burst riverbanks, leaving behind damaged piles of debris, trees, and cars.
It's extremely treacherous, time-consuming, it's dirty work, the water's still there. So we're having to go layer by layer, peeling these off to make those recoveries.
Reporters asked for specific details during the early hours of the Weather Service's warning, as well as who was in charge of emergency management.
And we're in the process of trying to put a timeline. That's going to take a little bit of time. As I've told you several times, that is not my priority this time. There's 3 priorities. That's locating the people out there, identifying and notifying the next of kin. That is what I'm taking as my job as sheriff here to do.
Some of the victims were spending their summer at Camp Mystic, a Christian summer camp for girls near the river's banks. The camp said they are mourning the loss of 27 campers and counselors. On Monday night, Kerrville Public Utility Board said it restored power to its remaining 3 largest outages in the West Kerr area. One survivor recounts his experience.
We got 8 different alerts. The first one came at 1 o'clock in the morning. The second one came at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the rest, to be honest with you, I counted to see, but the rest, we were in the attic trying to survive at that point.
The governor said they will continue search and rescue efforts. To report missing people or provide more information on the flood, people may call 830-258-1111. David Lamb, NTD News.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Trump at the White House, where they discussed recent developments in the Middle East. Meanwhile, an Israeli university presents evidence that the Hamas terrorist group used sexual violence as a weapon of war. NTD's Jason Perry has the update and a warning. This report includes content that some viewers may find disturbing.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife were welcomed by President Trump at the White House. Video released on Tuesday shows Trump showing them around the White House, and they stopped in front of a painting depicting Trump after he survived an assassination attempt almost a year ago. And while they were having dinner, Netanyahu made this announcement.
So I want to present to you, Mr. President, the letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well deserved, and you should get it. Thank you very much. This I didn't know.
Netanyahu is expected to meet with President Trump again during his visit. And on Tuesday, Netanyahu met with Vice President J.D. Vance and also Speaker of the House Mike Johnson, and reporters asked them a barrage of questions.
Sure. You know what? The speaker just agreed that we'll go in, speak for a while, then come back and try to say a few things to you, okay?
Also during his trip, Netanyahu met with Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio and Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff, who is set to travel to Qatar this week to continue talks on a possible ceasefire deal in the Gaza Strip. Witkoff issued a statement on the talks, which was read by State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce.
So we're hopeful by the end of this week that we'll have an agreement that brings us to a 60-day ceasefire. 10 live hostages will be released. 9 deceased will be released.
And in a related development, an Israeli university released a report presenting evidence that the Hamas terrorist group used sexual violence as a weapon of war during the October 7th attacks. A professor at the university said the report includes eyewitness and ear-witness testimonies that add up to at least 15 separate cases of sexual assault,
including cases of mutilation of sexual organs, as well as numerous bodies that had been found partially naked or fully naked, some handcuffed to poles or to trees.
She also said that the people who wrote the report aim to have the United Nations Secretary General include Hamas on the blacklist of entities that use or condone the use of sexual violence as a tool of war. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The U.S. is set to send more weapons to Ukraine. President Trump saying he's very unhappy that Russian President Vladimir Putin has not yet stopped the war. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastar has the latest.
We want to put defensive weapons because Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people.
Amid a sharp increase in Russian attacks on Ukraine, President Trump says the U.S. will send Kyiv more defensive weapons. Just last week, the Trump administration paused the shipment of some weapons to Ukraine. Now, during a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, Trump suggested that he didn't order that pause. Also last week, Trump had a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Moscow later said it'll continue the war in Ukraine, while Trump described the phone call as disappointing. During Tuesday's cabinet meeting, Trump said this.
I'm very unhappy with them. There's no reason for this. It's turned out to be tougher.
Trump also pointed out that the U.S. is sending its best equipment to Ukraine so it can defend itself against Russia. According to the president, the U.S. has so far sent $300 million worth of weapons to Kyiv, while European countries have sent a total of $100 million worth. And Senate lawmakers have been working on a bill to impose further sanctions on Russia. Trump was asked whether he'd consider signing the bill and increase the pressure on Moscow.
I'm looking at it.
Can you sign that?
It's an optional bill. It's totally at my option. They pass it totally at my option.
The Kremlin commented on Tuesday, saying more time is needed to clarify what weapons the U.S. will send to Ukraine. But while commenting on European weapons aid, a Kremlin spokesperson claimed that such shipments hinder peace efforts. The Kremlin also commented on the apparent suicide of Russia's former transportation minister. Roman Staratov reportedly killed himself on Monday, the same day the Kremlin dismissed him and replaced him with the new transportation minister. Now, Staratov's dismissal came just days after transportation chaos in Russia amid Ukrainian drone attacks. The Kremlin now said on Tuesday that the suicide was, quote, shocking. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Big news for flyers. Homeland Security Secretary Noem just made an announcement that will likely make your experience at the airport at least a little better. NTD correspondent Jason Blair joins us live from Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Good evening, Jason. What is the big announcement?
Hey, Tiffany. Yeah, so I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that going through airport security has not been a whole lot of fun for a very long time. However, today that could change at least a little bit. Secretary Noem said that shoes will no longer be required to be taken off going through airport security. Now, she says that this is effective immediately, and unsurprisingly, they say that this will improve wait times going through security. Makes a lot of sense, and it will also improve traveler experience. So here's Noem talking about that just a little bit ago. Have a look.
We want to improve this travel experience, but while maintaining safety standards and making sure that we are keeping people safe as they go to take their vacations, travel for work, or spend time with their families. So we took a hard look at how TSA does its business, how it does its screening processes, and what we do to make people safe, but also provide some hospitality as well.
So it's been nearly 20 years since this rule has been in place. Back in 2006. It was implemented based on, quote, intelligence pointing to a continuing threat. So this ends today, according to Noem, and from now on, the norm will be keeping your shoes on going through airport security.
And Jason, are there any other announcements from the department?
Well, Noem did talk a bit about Real ID. She did rave about it a little bit, says that it is doing very well, and when more people get Real ID, it will also improve wait times and has been improving wait times, she says. She did talk about that a little bit. Here's another clip from the press conference earlier today.
TSA has recently experienced some fantastic success with implementing Real ID. As you know, Real ID was put into statute over 20 years ago, and we recently put that into place that it went seamlessly. In fact, right now we are experiencing over 94% compliance with passengers who come through our airports and screening processes with Real ID compliant identification.
So Secretary Noem says that they are looking at every rule. They are evaluating every rule. However, so far they have not given any hints if there are going to be other changes to TSA procedures like airport security. Back to you.
All right, Jason, thanks for those updates. The Supreme Court today has paved the way for several federal agencies to carry out President Trump's plan to cut the size of the government. 8 justices granted the Trump administration's request to hold off a lower court's order that blocked sweeping layoffs. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson dissented. The majority agree the president's executive order is lawful, but didn't address whether or not an agency reduction in force plan was legal. Now that the One Big Beautiful Bill has been passed and signed into law, what is next to advance the president's agenda? Tune into NTD's Capitol Report with Steve Lance for analysis from Wisconsin Congressman Glenn Grothman. It all starts at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Coming up, a violent attack at a Texas ICE facility last week left one officer shot. Prosecutors call it an ambush and have announced multiple charges. Christina Corona reports. A retired New York Police Department chief of detectives accuses department leaders of bypassing protocols to promote unqualified investigators in exchange for up to $15,000. And the U.S. is moving to ban Chinese nationals and citizens from other adversarial nations from buying American farmland. Why officials warn it's a threat to food security. Jack Bradley reports when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. 11 people are facing charges after what law enforcement calls a planned ambush on an ICE facility in Texas last week. Authorities say the group intended to kill ICE corrections officers in a coordinated attack. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
It was a planned ambush with the intent to kill ICE corrections officers. Make no mistake, this was not a so-called peaceful protest.
Officials say on Friday, July 4th, at approximately 10:37 p.m., individuals attacked ICE officers at the Prairie Land ICE Detention Center in Alvarado, Texas.
10 to 12 individuals dressed in black military-style clothing began shooting fireworks and engaging in acts of vandalism at the facility. And this was part of an organized attack.
2 unarmed ICE officers stepped out, and a responding Alvarado officer was shot by someone hiding in the woods. Others vandalized property with graffiti, using phrases like ICE pig and traitor to lure officers outside.
My office has charged 10 individuals with 3 counts of attempted murder of a federal officer. Each of the 10 are also charged with 3 counts of discharging a firearm in relation to a crime of violence.
Authorities later stopped multiple suspects, recovering weapons, body armor, and a flag reading "Resist Fascism, Fight Oligarchy." Another person was charged with obstruction of justice for allegedly attempting to conceal and destroy evidence. If convicted, the suspects could face 10 years to life in prison. This comes as Governor Gavin Newsom blasted President Trump over ICE raids in Los Angeles Monday, calling him weak for targeting the city on the 6-month anniversary of its devastating wildfires.
What a disgrace, what's happening in MacArthur Park. What theater. On the 6-month anniversary, after all. Those National Guard men and women that were out there protecting people are now being used as political pawns. Out there on horsebacks running through soccer fields in the middle of the day.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass confronted federal agents at the scene, ordering them to leave. Authorities confirmed no one was detained in the incident. Christina Corona, NTD News.
A retired NYPD chief of detectives alleges in a lawsuit today that he was forced out of his job for questioning former leaders over what he viewed as improper promotions. NTD's Arlene Richards has the details.
A retired NYPD chief detective says his career was cut short. In a lawsuit filed on Tuesday, former Chief James Essig alleges the former top brass at the New York Police Department forced him to retire after he expressed concern over what he believed was improper promotions and transfers. He claims former NYPD leadership was selling promotions for up to $15,000. The suit alleges that starting in 2023, former Department Chief Jeffrey Madry sought to bypass the official transfer process, such as what he calls a high number of unusual and/or unvetted transfers of investigators. Essig says in the lawsuit that he later brought his concern to the attention of his superior, the then First Deputy Police Commissioner Edward Caban, but soon realized that Caban was also bypassing the official process. He accuses Caban of selling promotions in exchange for up to $15,000. Essig says he was forced to retire before he planned after Caban gave him two options: get demoted to captain or resign. 3 other former members of the NYPD have also filed lawsuits alleging corruption and retaliation. Mayor Eric Adams has been named as a defendant for allegedly allowing the unvetted transfers. A spokesperson for the mayor's office said City Hall will review the lawsuits. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The Justice Department announced today that it has arrested a Chinese state-sponsored man who hacked thousands of computers internationally, including in the United States. Department officials announced that Xi Zhouwei was arrested in Italy last Thursday. She and a co-defendant Zhang Yu have been charged in a 9-count indictment for their involvement in computer intrusions. The announcement states that both men conducted their hacking at the direction of China's Shanghai State Security Bureau, which conducts foreign intelligence services for the Chinese Communist Party. The indictment alleges that Xi was stealing important COVID-19 research for the CCP, while their government simultaneously withheld information about the virus and its origins. The Trump administration is working to ban foreign adversaries, particularly China, from buying U.S. farmland. They say it's a national security issue to lose American ownership of the domestic food supply. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
To ban the purchase of American farmland by China.
The U.S. is working to ban Chinese nationals and other foreign adversaries from purchasing U.S. farmland. Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins announced what's called a National Farm Security Action Plan. It's a series of actions to safeguard America's food supply.
American agriculture is not just about feeding our families, but about protecting our nation and standing up to foreign adversaries who are buying our farmland, stealing our research, and creating dangerous vulnerabilities in the very systems that sustain us.
Rollins was joined by several cabinet officials and nearly a dozen governors in announcing the move. On top of restricting farmland purchases, they're also working to reclaim the farmland already acquired by Chinese companies. The main concern here is that the Chinese Communist Party is directing its companies to purchase farmland to gain control of the U.S. domestic food supply.
Food security, just like energy resilience, just like where we get our water, that's all national security.
We are indeed in a new world where kinetic warfare is not the first choice of our rivals. It is acquiring our supply chain in agriculture. It's setting up spy shops on land next to military bases.
The Chinese scientists that are in our own universities and research that are stealing intellectual property. It wasn't too long ago they were taking rice seeds from my alma mater.
Other officials emphasize that Chinese-owned companies control land near sensitive military sites. See this map unveiled by the Department of Agriculture on Tuesday. The red blocks are actual military bases. You can see the hundreds of thousands of acres owned by Chinese companies and how close they are to these sensitive military sites. And this issue has been a concern for years. Last year, the Biden administration stopped a majority-owned Chinese company called Mine One from buying 12 acres of land next to Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming, just about a mile away. This base is home to nuclear-armed intercontinental ballistic missiles. Secretary Rollins also announced that as of Tuesday, she'll be a member of the Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S. This is an interagency committee responsible for tracking and investigating foreign nationals' real estate and business purchases. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
The EU and China are commemorating 50 years of diplomatic relations this week. However, the EU Commission president warned that China poses increasing risks to both the economy and security of the continent. NTD international correspondent David Yves reports from Paris.
As July 8th marked the 50th anniversary of EU-China bilateral diplomatic relations, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen reflected on the nature of the relationship. She began by praising China as a great global civilization that over the past 50 years has become a major global power. While she said hoping to establish new relations with Beijing, she criticized Beijing's recent diplomacy. On June 3rd, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi stated in Berlin that China cannot accept a Russian defeat in Ukraine, as this could allow the United States to fully shift its focus to China.
China's unyielding support for Russia is creating heightened instability and insecurity for Europe. We can say that China is de facto enabling Russia's war economy, and we cannot accept this. And I've always said how China continues to interact with Putin's war will be a determining factor for EU-China relations going forward.
On the economic front, von der Leyen warned that the EU's dependence on Chinese raw materials has increased. She also pointed to Beijing's ongoing practice of flooding global markets while disregarding international trade agreements as a major risk.
China is running the largest trade surplus in the history of mankind. Its trade surplus with our union has surpassed 300 billion euros last year. And this is, while it is getting harder and harder for European companies to do business in China.
Several EU countries in recent months have called on the European Union to better protect itself from the flood of goods coming from China. Since the Trump administration implemented new tariffs of up to 55% on Chinese imports, the European Central Bank has reported a 2 to 3% increase of Chinese goods exports to Europe. While the number is small, the trend is accelerating to the point of threatening industries within the EU bloc. French Minister of Finances Éric Lombard said on Monday, "We must protect our industry. Otherwise, the Chinese policy that consists of having a production capacity of more than 50% global market share in each sector will kill our industry." At the June G7 summit in Canada, Ursula von der Leyen warned of a new China shock, blaming Beijing trade practices since joining the World Trade Organization in 2001. She accused China of using models of domination, dependence, and blackmail against its trade partners. David Yves, NTD News, Paris.
Coming up, search and rescue efforts continue in Texas, where first responders have encountered extraordinarily challenging conditions following the catastrophic floods. A retired U.S. Navy captain who executed multiple rescue missions joins us to discuss the difficulties in such operations. And an alarming trend is emerging among America's youth. New research shows chronic conditions in children are becoming more prevalent. Sam Wong brings us the details on the latest report after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Search and rescue efforts continue after catastrophic Texas floods. Today, Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders mobilized 4 Black Hawk helicopters and 22 soldiers to assist in the efforts, which first responder crews have described as extremely challenging. Joining us now is retired U.S. Navy Captain Armin Kurdian. During his time in the Navy, Armin executed multiple live rescue missions. Armin, thank you so much for joining us. Now, with this tragedy, over 100 dead so far, over 160 still missing, give us a sense of what it's like on one of these rescue operations. I know you're not part of this one, but you've done live rescue operations in the past.
Certainly. One of the efforts that I was participating in, I was training off the coast of Norfolk, Virginia. We were just doing some routine training, working our system. When we were listening to the emergency frequency, we always have it on in the background, and we heard that an F-18 had gone down in the water. So what happens at that point? Our pilots set up a bingo profile, which means that they're going to say, all right, this is as long as we can stay out here before we absolutely have to go back for gas. We find a good position, and then you had a lot of air assets that were flying very down low. So because of line of sight, they weren't able to talk to towers. So we were helping to coordinate. Air traffic control. So we were coordinating communications relays, and we were passing along any information that we had. We had our radar out there looking to see if we could see any debris in the water as well. So what happens is your mindset completely shifts. What you care about most of all is finding an individual alive, and you don't want to leave your position or your station until you've found somebody. That's why these guys, they're doing 12-hour shifts. They don't want to go off shift. They want to get back out there as fast as they possibly can. It is just who we are. You've done all this training. You have these skill sets, and now you've got someone out there that needs your help. And nothing else matters at that point in your life except for finding someone alive.
Now, to your point, there's this Coast Guardsman making the headlines right now. He helped save 165 people. He said it took him 4 attempts to fly into that area. He added that airlift was the only option, given that, quote, bridges were gone, roadways were gone, and the water was coming up too high for boat rescue. How difficult is it to operate in conditions like that, where the water is too high for even a boat rescue?
At that point, like you said, the only option you have is air. And those first few hours, once it is safe for first responders or rescue aircraft to fly into an area, when they can actually go in, is when you're going to rescue the most number of people, and that's when they brought in those folks. So, when you think about 165 people that are being brought in, you are going in, you see 3 or 4 people, you're going down. You may have a lot of folks collected to say, hey, I can only take 6 or 7 people at once. You go and you come back, you drop them off, you get some gas, and you're right back out there again. You're continuing to operate that helicopter on a continuing basis, perhaps even extending your normal crew day in order to continue to do it, or you're performing some kind of turnover. So, all right, my crew's exhausted. Let's get out there. Or you say, hey, there's a bunch of people out here. So you're going back and you're vectoring another helicopter to get those other folks that are actually in that area. When the roads are blocked, when the rivers are blocked, when there's no physical access on the ground, aviation is your only option. Now, of course, in order to get supplies in and continue to support people who are alive and survivors, that's a real reason why you need to get the roads cleared, because you can obviously airlift supplies in if you need to, but you can't match that kind of quantity you can with trucks and other ground delivery. So every piece of that operation has its own need and its own requirements in order to perform the overall rescue and recovery management.
Armin, I want to go back to your earlier point about the intensity of these operations. You mentioned sometimes it goes for 12 hours or more. Now, this was this petty officer's first mission. He'd had only training before this. Many are calling him an American hero, others noting the intensity of such operations. Talk to us about the mental and physical toll this can have on the rescuers and how people can maybe help.
Well, not having met this guy ever, I would venture to guess that he doesn't consider himself a hero. He's a guy who's getting paid to go out there and do a job, and he did it well. He did it with absolute excellence and dedication, and there's a lot of people who are alive right now because of this helicopter crew that went out there and placed themselves into harm's way in order to rescue others. Certainly, there's the physical toll of continuing out there and flying back and forth. I mean, if you've ever flown in a helicopter, it's not the smoothest ride ever. But then at the same time, your senses are sharper, you're more focused, you're driving, but at the same time you're doing that. That takes a physical toll. Even though you may be sitting in that helicopter, just flying that helicopter, your body gets tired because you are focused and you're concentrating. Your brain is burning glucose, your brain is burning sugar just as much as your body would be burning sugar or other things if you were physically exerting yourself. It's a different kind of exhaustion. And that's why it is very important for these crews to go out there, do what they can, but then also to rest up to make sure that they are rested and go back out again. So you have enough people to provide relief on station, you have enough folks to actually go and break up the affected areas into search areas. Okay, we're going to search this area, then we're going to clear it. We're going to search this area, and then we're going to clear it. And the more assets you can bring into theater, the more you can do the coordination in order to execute those searches and get those searches done quickly. And then you may have to go back over those areas again to, see if you missed anybody, or perhaps at this point, because of recovery operation, and you're trying to find the victims, so that at least the families and loved ones know what happened to their relatives.
And Armin, shifting gears a bit here, on Friday, President Trump and the First Lady are scheduled to visit areas that were hit in Texas. Now, you're very involved in local California politics, also a former state Senate candidate there. What would you say is the role of the federal government in natural disasters, say presidential visits, working with local authorities? Talk to us about that dynamic.
So, your state and local authorities know the area the best. They've been there. They have fire trucks or police. So they're the best to perhaps provide the best expertise. But the federal government can bring in vast amounts of resources. They can bring in food. They can bring in helicopters. They can bring in the National Guard. You go to the governor and says, hey, how many helicopters do you need? How many trucks do you need? Okay, you saw Governor Huckabee offering 4 helicopters into Texas to bring them in. So it's that level of coordination and command and control that the federal government can provide. But from a leadership standpoint, whether it's the president of the United States or your member of your city council or your sheriff that's out there, whether it's in a press conference or out there on site and talking to people. Governor Noem said she was talking to one father who couldn't find their friends' kids couldn't be found, and they just sat there and they hugged. Leadership is a lot more than decision making. Leadership is a lot more than being a resource allocator or performing logistics. Leadership's a lot about providing that emotional support and that love that you need in a situation like this, to say, I understand, what's terrible. I may not be able to really totally understand your pain, but I'm here. We're going to do what we can to help you out. So that kind of a connection that the leader can make to the people who live under him or her is absolutely vital, and is just as critical for that kind of support as it is as food and water.
Now, when it comes to events around the flooding incident, there were 5 National Weather Service staffers on duty that night. That is as usual when severe weather is expected. There is still a lot of scrutiny over the level of communication between the Weather Service and local officials. There's also talk about potentially expanding sirens and warning systems in that area. What's your view on this, and do you think a careful review of communications is needed here?
Well, it sounds to me like the warnings went out in a timely fashion. The problem is, this is like 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. People are asleep. So even if your phone beeps, you may not hear it. If your phone is off, it's not going to turn on automatically for these kinds of things. I think that you may have a need for people who are in these remote areas to have, an emergency radio that's specifically tuned to NOAA alerts, because, it's not just flooding. It's the Midwest. It's from tornadoes. Or there could also be forest fire as well. Now, obviously, if it's a hurricane, you'll have significant advance warning of something like that. And Texas isn't necessarily prone to earthquakes either, but California is. So natural disasters, a lot of times they hit with very little warning. They knew the rain was coming, but the way the rain stagnated in certain areas, the vast amounts of concentrated rain that comes down, you got to remember, flooding doesn't happen where the rain comes down, generally speaking. It might a little bit, but more often than not, the rain comes down, it flows down, and then the creeks can't handle it, and it's the people who are downstream who really are suffering through that kind of disaster. So obviously, every single disaster is a learning experience. They will do a hot wash once this is done and find out what worked and what didn't work. It sounds to me like the alerts actually went out on everybody's phone. So people who did have their phones out and were listening to them got those kinds of alerts. A few months ago, we had an earthquake here in California, and my phone just started lit up, made a sound I'd never heard in my whole life. And what the heck is going on here? It was really loud. Then about 5 seconds later, my house started shaking. So we're using technology the best way that we possibly can, but at the same time, a little bit of extra precautions, especially when you have a lot of kids there. I don't necessarily blame the camp for what happened. I mean, this happened just within seconds. It was just unimaginable, but perhaps there are some additional mechanisms that folks could use in order to get that warning and hear it and act upon it with a few extra minutes to spare.
Armin Kurdian, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Turning our attention now to children's health. A new study indicates an alarming downward trend among America's youth. Experts say kids nowadays are more likely to develop chronic conditions than they did 2 decades ago. NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
Upon entering the Trump administration, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made it a priority to address concerns over the health of America's children.
There's a generation of kids coming up that was just damaged, that was suffering from autoimmune diseases like juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis. I was looking around and saying, why is nobody talking about this?
Now, a new study is echoing Kennedy's concerns. According to findings published by the Journal of the American Medical Association, the health of U.S. children declined between 2007 and 2023. Researchers say an American kid was 15 to 20% more likely to have a chronic illness in 2023 than a child in 2011. Along with that, conditions such as early menstruation, depression, sleep apnea, and autism were becoming more prevalent.
If you're full-blown autism, it's a nonverbal, non-toilet trained, head banging, stimming, toe walking. These are kids that will never throw a baseball. They'll never graduate high school. They'll never go out and take a girl on a date.
On mortality rates, the report suggests that American kids were nearly twice as likely to die than those in other high-income nations. The U.S. also saw higher rates of premature birth and sudden unexpected death among infants.
There's something wrong, and we will not stop until we defeat the chronic disease epidemic.
Children's health has been a topic of conversation among the nation's decision makers. Earlier this year, President Trump's Make America Healthy Again Commission published a report identifying several major factors behind the uptick in childhood chronic diseases. Those causes include ultra-processed foods, chemical exposures, and overuse of medications. Sam Wong, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Coming up in tennis, defending Wimbledon champion Carlos Alcaraz put his 18-game winning streak on the line today. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we return. For your sports news, we go by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on today, like you're sitting with us instead of the big wall. But let's start with the Wimbledon as the men's semifinals are starting to take shape. What's the men's side looking like?
Yeah, two-time defending champion Carlos Alcaraz beat Cam Norrie in straight sets today to advance to the semis. Now, he's won 19 straight matches at Wimbledon. That dates all the way back to 2023. And now, also, fellow American Taylor Fritz seeded 5th. He won in 4 sets today to advance as well. So it'll be Fritz versus Alcaraz in the semifinals, and that's going to be played on Friday. Now, the other semifinal matchups going to be figured out tomorrow, but one player still miraculously in the hunt, top-ranked Jannik Sinner. Now, I say miraculously because yesterday, Sinner injured his elbow in the very first game of the match against Grigor Dimitrov. Lost the first set. Finally, midway through the second set, he takes a medical timeout. He also lost the second set. But then, 4 games into the third set, Dimitrov injures his pectoral muscle, has to retire from the match while leading the world's #1 ranked player 2 sets to love. So Sinner ends up advancing by virtue of Dimitrov's injury. Today, though, Sinner had to cancel his practice session to get an MRI done on his elbow. But he's scheduled to face 10th-seeded Ben Shelton tomorrow, should he be able to play. Also tomorrow, Novak Djokovic is going to face Flavio Cabali. Winners of those two matches will advance to the semifinals. You got all that?
Lots of injuries.
Yeah, I
That's
just
what
sit
I
here
got.
so I can explain that better to you. Over at the wall, it'd be too confusing. So we did it right here, all right?
We'll bring a diagram up tomorrow for all of this. Well, looking at the women's draw, the #1 ranked player in the world, Sabalenka, had to rally to win today. What is the women's draw looking like right now?
Yeah, Sabalenka is into the semifinals now after she dropped the first set today against 37-year-old Lara Sigmund. So she was tested a bit. Let's actually listen to what she said after the match.
Yeah, honestly, I think there is a big possibility that I would have lose this match if I didn't learn that lesson at the French Open. And in some moments I was just keep reminding myself, which is probably a bit crazy, but I was keep reminding myself that, come on, it's a quarterfinal of Wimbledon. You cannot give up. You cannot let the emotions just take over you and lose another match.
Now, elsewhere today, 13th-seeded Amanda Anisimova, she's an American, won in straight sets to advance as well to get to the semifinals. She will face Sabalenka. That'll be on Thursday. So some big important matches coming up.
Does sound like it. Moving to soccer news. Last week we discussed the tragic death of Liverpool forward Diogo Jota and his brother Andre Silva. Have authorities figured out why his Lamborghini crashed?
You know, sort of. Now, they issued a preliminary report saying he was probably speeding when the crash happened. Now, they're also investigating whether a tire burst as well. Now, as you can see on this footage here, there's a big, long tire mark that's kind of leading up to that crash scene. That's probably the one, obviously, they'll be looking at. At this point, all we know is a one-car accident in northwestern Spain. Previously, they weren't sure, which one is driving. It sounds like they think it was Jota as well. Now, sadly, of course, the car burst into flames on the side of the road. You can see pretty much there the charred remains of what's left on the side of the road. Now, Jota played for Liverpool the past 5 years, scored 65 goals in 182 games for them. So, obviously, a very sad situation over there. But it sounds like more reporting or more investigating is to come.
Well, looking at WNBA news, Indiana Fever star Caitlin Clark has now missed the past 5 games with a groin injury. What is the latest on her?
She said today that she expects to play tomorrow night against Golden State Valkyries. Now, she participated in 5-on-5 drills in practice yesterday for the first time since he was injured. That was back on June 24th. And this was her second left leg injury of the season. She also missed 5 games with a quad injury earlier. So she's missed now 10 of their 18 games this year. Despite that, Clark finished as one of the top 2 vote getters for the All-Star game. She and Nafisa Collier finished 1-2 in the voting. So they will be team captains for the All-Star game. They'll get to choose their teammates, and that is going to happen tonight. Now, the actual All-Star game is going to take place on July 19. That is a week from Saturday. So, Tiff, be sure to mark your calendars for that one, all right?
All right, things to look forward to.
For sure.
Davis, always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
And that's all for today's news. For on-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.